Could this be a push? Could this be a final push for a sign of things to come? Lynn Roberts, head coach, LA Sparks, planting seeds in the ground for Caitlin Clark to blossom and eventually put on a LA Sparks uniform. The talks were once hot. They might be heating up again.
There is a storm building inside the WNBA right now, and it is unlike anything this league has ever seen. Not a trade rumor, not locker room drama, something bigger, something that could fundamentally reshape the entire landscape of women's basketball for the next decade. And at the center of it all is a name that has become the most talked about in the sport, Caitlin Clark. The Indiana Fever are in free fall. Sources embedded deep inside the situation are painting a picture of an organization that has spectacularly mismanaged its most valuable asset. And now the consequences are arriving fast and without mercy. Because the Los Angeles Sparks, under the sharp, calculated leadership of head coach Lynn Roberts, are reportedly moving in with an aggressive, unprecedented push to bring Caitlin Clark to the West Coast. And if even half of what is leaking out of this situation is accurate, the fallout is going to be absolutely seismic.
They're off the floor. I just don't think that on the floor, it's a good mix. I think they just see the game through two different lenses. And we have been yearning and calling for Stephanie White to actually stand up for, represent, and be front and center for Caitlin Clark. And she's refused to do it at every turn outside of a 30-second clip post the Alyssa Thomas situation, in which she backtracked on everything she said and made Alyssa Thomas the victim when her superstar point guard was the victim. It just makes no sense how Stephanie White has gone about this. And you see the things that LA Sparks doing. You got Cameron Brink, who's friends with Caitlin Clark. You got Kate Money Martin, who's best friends with Caitlin Clark. Sophie Cunningham will be a free agent at the end of this season. Hey, Sophie Lexi can making her way downtown. Look.
Stay with us through this entire video, because by the end, you're going to see this situation in a completely different light. And if you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is developing fast, and you do not want to be the last one to know when the next major update drops. To understand why this is happening, you have to rewind and look at what has been unfolding in Indiana over the past several months. Because the signs were always there. They were visible to anyone paying close enough attention. And yet somehow the people inside the Fever organization seemed completely blind to what they were doing. From the very beginning of this chapter, Caitlin Clark has faced a level of physical targeting on the court that is frankly difficult to watch. Opposing players have gone after her with a relentlessness that borders on dangerous. Hard fouls, late hits, moments that cross the line between competitive basketball and something far more personal.
It has to do better, and we have to invest in those areas. The technology can get better. We can treat the referees a little bit better, pay them like they're full-time employees. I think things like that. And, I think a lot has obviously come after that. And as I've stood up here and said before, like the harassment, the hate, none of that is okay. That goes for the opposing team we play. That goes for my teammates. That goes for my coaches. There should never be a question of character. Like I've always stood up here and said that, and that's truly what I believe. That's how I was raised. So, none of that is okay, and I don't want anybody to ever experience that. I think it can be really frustrating to me at times, and I think it's difficult. I think a lot of people sometimes think I'm a robot. I'm not a robot. I have emotions. I have feelings, and it can be really difficult to go through a lot of that. And I'm 24 years old trying to navigate a lot, and I think at times I've been in this world for 4 years now, and you would never.
And through all of it, through every flagrant play, every moment where Clark needed her coaching staff to step up and draw a line, the bench sat quiet. That silence is deafening when you realize what it communicates to a player. It says, "We are not going to fight for you." It says, "Your safety is not our priority." It says, "Figure out yourself." No player, especially not the most marketable and talented player in the sport, should ever have to absorb that message from the people who were supposed to have her back. But the physical targeting was only one layer of the problem, because what happened next pushed things into genuinely shocking territory.
When you think about like the passion that these players have and their want to, how do you marry that with the execution that you just talked about in this film session to actually win games?
Yeah, and that's the issue right now, is the ability to push through and get out of our own way on some level. But there's an element of toughness and effort that isn't consistent. And last night we just looked disconnected. Maybe that's because we sat out 8 days, didn't play. But I don't like using excuses. We got to be better. We're pros. We all have a job to do. We got to show up and do it better. And like I've said many, many times, the good news is today it's all about Indiana. We got to turn the page, learn from what we learned from what we saw last night. But that's not going to win any games. The level of connectedness, the max, second.
Reports began surfacing that the coaching staff had been manipulating Caitlin Clark's playing time through fabricated injury reports. A completely healthy superstar, a player the entire league revolves around, was being held back from the court under the cover of so-called medical management. Let that sink in. They were not protecting her. They were controlling her, and they thought they could get away with it by dressing it up in medical language. It backfired badly. Clark's inner circle reportedly reached a boiling point. And when a player of her caliber and her camp sophistication decides they have had enough, teams do not come back from that. The trust was already fragile. This shattered it. There was a moment, a press conference moment, that stopped a lot of people in their tracks. Because Caitlin Clark, who has always been measured and careful with her words in front of the media, said something that revealed just how much weight she had been carrying quietly. She talked about the harassment, the hate directed at not just opposing teams, but at her own teammates, her own coaches. She was careful, diplomatic even, but she said something that hit differently than anything else she had said publicly up to that point. She said people sometimes think she is a robot, that she is not, that she has emotions, that she has feelings, that at 24 years old, she is navigating more than most people realize, and that some of what she goes through affects her more than she lets on. That is not the statement of a player who is comfortable. That is not the statement of someone who feels supported, protected, and valued by the people around her. That is someone who has been holding it together in public while things quietly unravel behind closed doors. And the basketball world heard it, even if the Indiana front office apparently did not.
And then players and media, but it still just didn't work out in their favor. I mean, what else does a person have to do if they're averaging 24 points, 6 assists, a 5'8" guard shooting above 50% from the field? Like, what else can you do?
Other than be super active on social media, nothing. Like that seems to be what the parameters are. So, but KP's about winning. She's about being great, being excellent. She'll take it in stride.
What are you going to, if you haven't been able to talk to her about it yet, when you do, what are you going to say to her about it? Because, I mean, she's having a season that is worthy of being an all-star starter. Well, MVP, but an all-star starter just for the base level.
I haven't talked to her yet about it. I'll see how that conversation goes.
Okay.
Listen, man, Kelsey Plum got did dirty, just as Caitlin Clark got did dirty.
Because while Indiana kept moving through its internal dysfunction, the LA Sparks were watching very carefully. Here is where things get particularly complicated for Indiana. Because at the center of this entire collapse is the question of leadership, specifically the lack of it. Stephanie White has had numerous opportunities, clear, obvious, public opportunities, to stand in front of a microphone and go to bat for a franchise player, to say definitively and without hesitation, what is happening to Caitlin Clark on that court is unacceptable, and this organization will not tolerate it. She has not done it, not in any meaningful way. The closest thing to a public defense came in the aftermath of the Alyssa Thomas situation, a moment that had the entire WNBA community watching to see how Indiana's coaching staff would respond. What followed was a 30-second clip that seemed to initially support Clark, and then was almost immediately walked back in a way that effectively positioned Thomas as the aggrieved party. Thomas, not Clark. The player who had just had something done to her was somehow repositioned as the one who needed sympathy. That reversal was stunning, and it spoke volumes about the power dynamics playing out inside the Indiana organization. A head coach who cannot clearly and consistently stand behind her most important player in a public moment of crisis is a head coach whose relationship with that player is already fundamentally broken. Clark's camp noticed, the league noticed, and the Sparks organization absolutely noticed. There's a coaching staff out there, one preparing to make a very aggressive move, that believes it can offer Caitlin Clark exactly what Indiana has failed to provide. A system built around her strengths, a locker room culture that protects her, and a head coach who will actually fight for her when it matters. Here is where this story shifts from a tale of collapse to something far more fascinating. A calculated, methodical power play being run by an organization that identified an opportunity and is executing on it with precision. Lynn Roberts is not dropping hints by accident. Nothing about what she and the Sparks organization have done recently feels coincidental. It feels deliberate. It feels like a blueprint being assembled piece by piece, and Caitlin Clark's name is written at the top of it. Start with Kate Martin, Clark's closest friend in the professional game. The Sparks recently signed Martin to a full standard contract. Not developmental, not tentative, not exploratory. A real, committed contract that puts her firmly in the Los Angeles ecosystem. Ask yourself why. Ask yourself why an organization would make a specific effort to lock up the best friend of the player they reportedly want to acquire. The answer is not subtle. Then there is Cameron Brink, another player with an established relationship with Clark, already embedded in the LA system. And Sophie Cunningham, who has been connected to Clark throughout her time in the league, is heading toward free agency at the end of the current season. The Sparks are not just building a roster. They're building a comfort zone. They are constructing the social architecture that would make it genuinely attractive for a 24-year-old navigating an incredibly difficult professional environment to consider a new home. That is sophisticated, that is smart, and it is working if the reports coming out of this situation are to be believed. Lynn Roberts turned heads across the basketball world when she began making increasingly pointed public comments that seemed specifically tailored to signal to Clark and to Clark's representatives that Los Angeles is the right place for her next chapter. The Sparks smell an opportunity created entirely by Indiana's incompetence, and they are not wasting a single second of it. Beyond the personal connections and the coaching philosophy, there's a financial dimension to this story that cannot be ignored. Because the Los Angeles market is not just emotionally appealing for a player of Clark's profile, it is commercially transformative. Sources close to the developing situation have indicated that the Sparks are preparing a financial package and a trade structure that would be genuinely historic by WNBA standards. A reset the market kind of offer, one that reflects not just Clark's on-court production, but her commercial value, her media presence, her merchandise numbers, and the sheer gravitational pull she has on casual sports fans who might otherwise not watch women's basketball at all. Los Angeles, as a market, exponentially amplifies all of that. The sponsorship opportunities, the media exposure, the crossover potential with the entertainment industry, all of it gets dramatically larger the moment Clark is playing in Crypto.com arena in front of a Los Angeles audience and a national spotlight that the Indiana market simply cannot match. The business logic is almost impossible to argue against, and Indiana's front office knows it. That is part of why the panic inside the organization is reportedly so severe. They're not just losing a great player. They are losing an economic engine that would have funded their franchise's relevance for the next 10 years. What do they have to offer in response? Right now, based on everything that is leaking out of this situation, not much. An apology is not a contract. Promises from the same people who issued false injury reports are not reassurances. And Clark's camp has every reason to look west and see a far cleaner, far more exciting future waiting. Just when you thought the internal pressure on Indiana could not get any heavier, another layer of controversy arrived, and this one was impossible to brush aside. The All-Star voting situation sent shockwaves through the league community, and it struck at something fundamental. The question of whether Caitlin Clark is being treated fairly by the very institutions that are supposed to celebrate her excellence. Paige Becker accumulated a staggering vote surge in a window of time that had people across the basketball world raising their eyebrows hard. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of votes appearing in days. The kind of number that defies organic explanation. And the outcome kept Clark from a starting position that, by virtually every measurable basketball metric, she had earned. But Clark was not the only one who got overlooked. Kelsey Plum, averaging the kind of numbers that would make any executive in the league salivate, was also pushed aside in a process that felt, to many observers, deeply compromised. A player putting up 24 points, 6 assists, shooting above 50% from the field, and the conversation somehow becomes about someone else. That is the kind of institutional dismissal that does not just sting in the moment. It compounds. It stacks on top of everything else that has been happening. And it makes a player quietly ask whether the system she is operating inside is actually set up to reward her. For Clark specifically, this was one more signal in a long sequence of signals that something is fundamentally broken in the environment around her. And the Sparks, a franchise actively building a narrative about being the organization that values her properly, we're watching every single development with great interest. If you think the situation is just about one player and one franchise, you're missing the bigger picture. Because at league headquarters, this developing saga is producing something close to genuine crisis-level anxiety. A marquee player, the most commercially valuable athlete in the history of women's basketball, threatening to force her way out of a team because of coaching negligence and institutional deception, is a category of nightmare that WNBA leadership genuinely cannot afford right now. Not at this stage of the league's growth. Not when so much of the recent momentum and new audience engagement has been built on Clark's gravitational pull. The commissioner is reportedly demanding answers from the Indiana front office. Hard questions about how a coaching staff managed to so thoroughly alienate the one player the entire league has been riding into its highest profile era in decades. The pressure on Indiana's management is not just internal anymore. It is coming from the top of the organization that governs the entire sport. And that pressure is compounding daily. The Fever's locker room, by multiple accounts, is fractured. The brand identity, which was already complicated, is now actively being damaged. Coaching careers that were supposed to be building toward something are instead accelerating toward an ending. Because when your franchise player checks out mentally, and when the league office is calling for accountability, and when the fan base is demanding terminations, there is no version of events where the coaching staff survives with their reputations intact. Stephanie White and her staff thought they could use media management, calculated roster decisions, and a layer of institutional protection to control this narrative. Instead, they handed their critics a perfectly constructed case study in exactly how not to manage a generational talent. One of the more fascinating subplots inside this entire story is the dynamic between Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell. Two players who were supposed to be building something together in Indiana, a backcourt pairing that had real potential to become one of the most talked about in the league. Insiders who have watched the situation closely suggest that the on-court relationship between Clark and Mitchell has never truly clicked the way Indiana hoped it would. Not because of any personal animosity, but because of a genuine difference in how the two players see and process the game. Different lenses, different rhythms, different instincts about when to push and when to pull back. In a functional organization with strong coaching leadership, that kind of difference is manageable. It can be developed. Deficiencies can be addressed. Communication can be built. And two talented players can learn to coexist productively. But Indiana is not a functional organization right now. And without the coaching infrastructure to bridge the gap, the partnership has drifted rather than developed. And what that looks like from the outside, to a team like the Sparks that is evaluating every variable, is a franchise that mishandled an extraordinary opportunity. Multiple sources are now suggesting that regardless of how the remainder of the current season plays out, this is likely the final chapter of Clark and Mitchell as teammates. The writing on that wall is clear enough that even casual observers are starting to read it. So where does all of this end? Here is the honest assessment of the situation as it stands. Indiana has a closing window, and it is closing fast. If the front office cannot make dramatic, visible, credible moves to demonstrate to Caitlin Clark and her representatives that the environment around her is fundamentally changing, the Los Angeles proposition becomes effectively unstoppable. And dramatic in this context does not mean a statement. It does not mean a press conference. It means the kind of action that produces real, structural change inside the organization. Accountability for the decisions that brought them to this point. A clear, unmistakable signal that the people who presided over this dysfunction are being removed from the equation. Whether Indiana's ownership has the courage or the self-awareness to take those steps before it is too late is, frankly, an open question. Because organizations that have spent months making the wrong calls in the wrong order rarely flip that switch overnight. And while Indiana deliberates, the sparks keep building. Kate Martin is already in place. The financial structure for a historic offer is reportedly taking shape. Lynn Roberts is publicly positioning her organization as the destination for a superstar who deserves better than what she has received. The roster pieces are being assembled. The comfort network is being constructed. And the clock for Indiana is not stopping. Now think about what a Caitlin Clark in Los Angeles actually means for the sport. Forget the franchise implications for a moment and look at the broader picture. Clark in a major market, in a coaching system built around her, surrounded by people she trusts, with the commercial infrastructure of Los Angeles amplifying every single thing she does. That is not just a good outcome for the Sparks. That is a transformation of what is possible for women's basketball on a national scale. The brands that follow her, the new audiences she brings in, the television numbers she generates, the merchandise, the conversation she sparks, pun very much intended, in living rooms and sports bars and online communities that have never been WNBA spaces before. All of that goes to Los Angeles if Indiana cannot hold on to her. And the ripple effect on the rest of the league would be felt for years. That is why the commissioner is panicked. That is why Indiana's front office is scrambling. That is why every front office in the league is watching the situation unfold with a level of attention usually reserved for a championship series. This is the biggest move in the history of the WNBA that has not happened yet, and it may be closer to happening than most people realize. Here is the thought worth sitting with after everything you just heard. Caitlin Clark did not ask to become the axis around which this entire conversation spins. She asked to play basketball at the highest level, to be coached by people who would have her back, to operate inside an organization that treated her with the professionalism and respect that her talent and her commercial value clearly merit. She asked for normal professional standards. She did not receive them. And the most powerful statement she can make, more powerful than anything she could say in a press conference, more impactful than any social media post, is to make a decision about her future that reflects exactly how much she has been let down by the people who were supposed to protect her investment in this league. Whether that decision ultimately takes her to Los Angeles or somewhere else entirely, the damage to Indiana is already done. The trust is broken. The relationship is compromised in ways that are not easily repaired. And the entire basketball world is watching to see whether the Fever organization has the wisdom and the urgency to recognize just how much they are about to lose. The Sparks are ready. Lynn Roberts has made that unmistakably clear. The financial structure is reportedly in place. The personal connections are already embedded in the roster. The coaching philosophy is built for exactly the kind of player Clark is. And the market, the enormous, celebrity-saturated, commercially explosive Los Angeles market, is waiting. Indiana has a choice to make, and the window for making it correctly is getting smaller by the day. This story is nowhere near finished. It is, in many ways, just beginning. And the next chapter is going to be one that the WNBA community remembers for a very long time. If this video gave you a new perspective on what is happening inside the WNBA right now, drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I genuinely want to know what you think happens next. Does Caitlin Clark stay in Indiana and force a rebuild around her vision? Or does she head west and completely change the game in Los Angeles? Let's hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this situation is moving fast and the next major update in this story could drop at any moment. You do not want to be scrambling to catch up when the biggest trade in women's basketball history becomes official. The WNBA will never look the same after this, and we will be right here when it all goes down.